Welcome to Tales in the Dark, where real-life encounters twist into haunting tales. In Story 4, a young family's search for a peaceful home turns into a nightmare. What begins as a place of warmth and new beginnings transforms into a waking horror, as shadowy figures, eerie laughter, and chilling encounters push them to the edge. Forced to confront the sinister truth lurking in their sanctuary, they realize escape may be their only option. Prepare yourself for the other family, and if spine-tingling stories call to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now, let's step into the shadows. Story 4: The Other Family. When I gave birth to my fourth child, my husband and I knew we needed more space. Our cramped second-floor apartment felt suffocating, with the constant complaints from the neighbor below. For kids, full of energy, were impossible to keep quiet. I longed for a place where their laughter wouldn't feel like a burden. Then, we found it, the perfect home. Nestled on 2 acres of secluded land, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. It had 4 spacious bedrooms, a gleaming granite kitchen, and a playground out back. It was a dream. My 2 oldest boys took the basement rooms, while the younger ones shared a room upstairs. Finally, no more anxious whispers for the kids to be quiet. They could be free. Our first night in the house felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I left the windows open, listening to the symphony of frogs and insects. The house was alive with the sound of my children running, laughing, playing. For once, their noise brought me peace. Or so I thought. A month passed, and something began to change. The kids' energy, once familiar, grew frantic. They were constantly running, laughing, louder and more restless than ever before. Their voices echoed from rooms they weren't supposed to be in, and their toys began appearing in the strangest places, on the kitchen counter, in my closet, even outside. My daughter's sweet giggles at night turned unsettling. She'd sit with her doll, whispering to herself, long after everyone else had gone to sleep. It was as if she wasn't alone, but I told myself it was just the adjustment to a new home. One Saturday, I suggested a game of hide and seek, hoping to burn off some of their endless energy. It had always worked back in the apartment. The rules were simple: they could hide anywhere inside the house or in the garage. I was the seeker, and as I counted, I heard the front door open and close, so I decided to check the garage first. As I stepped into the dim, cluttered space, a chill crept down my spine. Shadows danced in the corners, and the air felt heavier than it should. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a small head peeking out from behind a stack of boxes in the far corner. At first, I thought it was one of my boys. But something about the way the figure stood, so still, so silent, was wrong. I could see just one eye, staring at me from behind the box. His hand gripped the top of the stack, too rigid, too deliberate. My pulse quickened. I was halfway to him when I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around to find my son, standing in the shadow of the car, staring at me. A scream ripped from my throat. My son rushed to me, wide-eyed with confusion. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked. I turned back toward the boxes. The figure, gone. There was no one there. But as I stared at the stack of boxes, one of them shifted slightly, as if something, or someone, had bumped into it just moments before. My heart pounded, the hairs on my neck standing on end. I forced a shaky smile, telling myself it was just a trick of the dim light, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something had been there. Something I couldn't explain. A few days later, exhausted from work, I asked my daughter to move her laundry to the dryer while I finished dinner. When she didn't come back, I went to check on her. As I descended into the basement, I heard her talking, but her voice wasn't right. It was soft, intimate, as though she were confiding
One,
in someone.
two, three,
Who are you
four,
talking to?
five, six,
I called
seven,
out.
8,
She
9.
came rushing around the corner, pale and wide-eyed. Mom, why are there two of you? I froze. What do you mean? She told me she had been talking to me the whole time, but I didn't move. You were just standing there, Mom, with your back to me, she said, her voice small and shaky. I kept telling you about my day, but you didn't say anything. You didn't even turn around. You were just standing there, all weird, looking at the wall. She paused, her little face scrunched up in confusion. You weren't like normal. You were standing so still, Mom, like a statue. You didn't breathe right. It was scary. I thought you were mad at me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Why were you being so creepy? Cold fear washed over me. My legs felt weak as I rushed into the laundry room, but it was empty. The door to my son's room slammed shut with a deafening bang. Grabbing my daughter's hand, I fled upstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. That night, I told my husband about the strange boy in the garage and the figure my daughter had seen. He laughed it off, saying it was just our imaginations running wild. He didn't understand, this wasn't just some nightmare. That weekend, something even worse happened. Half asleep, I felt someone slip into bed beside me. Thinking it was my husband, I reached out to hug him, but something was wrong. His body was cold and stiff, not the familiar warmth I expected. My eyes shot open, and I froze. The person next to me wasn't my husband. He was slimmer, with dark hair that wasn't his. I turned toward the door, and there stood my husband. Panicked, I leaped out of bed, scrambling to my feet. As I moved, I felt the lingering coldness in the spot where the figure had been lying, a chill that seeped into my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. It wasn't just the temperature, it was an unnatural, bone-deep cold, like the air itself had been drained of warmth. Trembling, I ran to my husband, my body shaking uncontrollably. But when I glanced back, the figure on the bed was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The icy imprint on the sheets still remained. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, what else could it be? But the cold clung to me, refusing to let me forget. Later that evening, exhausted, I lay down for a nap. The children were watching a movie in the living room. As I drifted in and out of sleep, I heard children laughing outside, near the playground. It was familiar, the sound of my kids playing, until I remembered they were still inside. Curious, I got up and peered out the window, but the moment I looked, the laughter stopped, abruptly, unnaturally. The sudden silence sent a chill down my spine. The playground outside was eerily still, the swings swaying slightly as if someone had just been on them. My heart raced. I strained my ears, trying to catch even the faintest sound, but the air felt too thick, too heavy. The laughter that had filled the yard moments ago had vanished without a trace, leaving an unsettling emptiness. I rushed to the living room, my pulse pounding in my ears. There, all four of my children sat, eyes glued to the movie, completely absorbed and unaware of the eerie voices I had heard. Their laughter, their voices, had been coming from somewhere else. The realization that I had no idea who, or what, had been outside hit me like a punch to the chest. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I asked them if they'd been outside. They stared at me, confused. It wasn't them. A week later, my youngest son started sleeping in his older brother's room. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I remembered waking in the night to hear my daughter whispering in her room. When I asked my youngest why he was no longer sleeping in his own bed, his answer chilled me to the core. He told me that every night, he saw a pale boy standing in his sister's closet. A boy with no mouth, who just stood there, watching them sleep. My son said he would hear footsteps pacing around the room at night. One night, he woke up to see the boy standing at the foot of his bed, silently staring at him. Panicking, he threw the blankets over his head and ran to his brother's room, too terrified to come back. Since that night, he refuses to sleep in his own room, afraid of seeing the boy again. Now, the toys scattered around the house made sense. My kids told me they'd been disappearing ever since we moved in. They thought I had taken them, but I hadn't. I told my husband everything, the boy in the garage, the figure our daughter saw, and now the pale, mouthless boy our son kept seeing in the closet. My voice shook as I explained how our children were terrified, how I was terrified. I told him about the footsteps, the toys moving on their own, and how the house no longer felt like a home but something darker. I was desperate, pleading with him to understand that something was wrong, that we needed to leave. But he didn't believe me. He looked at me with a tired smile and said I was just overreacting. It's a new place, he insisted. The kids are adjusting, and you've been stressed. It's all in your head. I could feel my frustration bubbling over, but before I could respond, he cut me off. We can't just pack up and leave. We put everything into this house, all our savings. We can't afford to move again. I stared at him, my heart sinking. I wanted to scream, to make him understand that this was more than just stress or adjustment. I wanted him to feel the coldness that lingered in the bed, to hear the eerie laughter that echoed outside. But his mind was made up. We don't have a choice, he said softly, his voice final. This is our home now. I nodded, but deep down, I felt trapped. This wasn't home. It was something else entirely, something far more sinister. And we were stuck. The next evening, my husband was in the garage, working on his car. He had been under the car for a while, lost in his repairs, when he noticed a pair of feet standing just beyond the edge of the car. Thinking it was me, he called out, "Hey, can you hand me that wrench?" But there was no response. A few moments passed, and something didn't feel right. The silence was heavy, unnatural. He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked up, only to freeze in place. The woman standing there wasn't me. Her skin was pale, almost gray, as if drained of life. Her face was eerily still, her eyes dead and unfocused, staring straight ahead without blinking. Her mouth, there was something horribly wrong with her mouth. It was blurred, almost smudged, as if someone had taken an eraser to her face. She didn't move. She just stood there, motionless, her presence radiating an unnatural cold. Panic surged through him. His heart pounded as he scrambled to his feet, backing away from the figure. She remained silent, her lifeless eyes following him. He bolted for the door, not daring to look back. As he reached the exit, the garage door suddenly slammed shut behind him with a loud, echoing bang, the sound vibrating through the walls. He ran into the house, breathless, his face pale with fear. For the first time, he looked at me, eyes wide with terror, and I knew he believed me. That night, we didn't take any chances. We gathered all the kids and slept together in one room, huddled close, the children sensing our fear. None of us spoke much, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Every creak, every gust of wind outside, sent a chill down my spine. We kept the lights on all night, too afraid of what might happen if we let the darkness take over. The very next day, we left the house. There was no time to pack, no time to think about what to take or leave behind. We gathered the kids, grabbed only the essentials, and moved in with my husband's parents. There was no discussion, he was just as scared as I was now, and the decision to leave was made without question. We would sell the house, and that was that. A few days later, we went back to the house, planning to start packing and prepare it for sale. As we pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before us, silent and still. We hesitated, neither of us wanting to step foot inside. But as we stood there, gathering our courage, something caught my eye. I glanced toward the basement window, and my heart stopped. A figure, a man, was standing in the basement, staring out at us. He was faint, almost transparent, but his gaze was fixed, cold, and unwavering. His presence sent a wave of icy dread over both of us. I grabbed my husband's arm, my voice shaking. "Do you see that?" I whispered. He nodded, his face pale. Without a word, we backed away from the house, got into the car, and left. Neither of us could face going back inside. We hired movers to handle everything, unwilling to step foot in that place again. Months passed, and finally, the house was sold. The new owners were an older couple, and we didn't tell them about the hauntings. How could we? We just wanted to be done with it, to leave that nightmare behind us forever. As the sale closed and we handed over the keys, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. But at the same time, relief washed over me. It wasn't our house anymore, and whatever was inside, it wasn't our problem anymore. A few months later, we found a new home near the city. It was smaller, but cozy, and more importantly, it was surrounded by other families. The neighborhood bustled with life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we felt safe. Since moving in, nothing strange has happened. No eerie figures, no misplaced toys, no cold chills creeping through the rooms. It was as if all the horrors of our old house were left behind. We never bothered to look into the history of that first home, some things were better left unknown. Out of curiosity, we drove by the old house a few months after selling it. The older couple's car was still in the driveway, the curtains drawn. From the outside, everything seemed perfectly normal, just like it did when we first found it. I wondered if they had experienced the same terrifying things we had. Were they living with the same ghostly figures, the strange footsteps, the unnatural cold? I couldn't help but wonder why it happened to us. Maybe it was because of our family, our kids, our energy, the noise and life we brought into that house. Whatever lived there before us, maybe it didn't like the chaos we brought with us. Maybe our presence was too overwhelming for it to tolerate, and that's why everything spiraled out of control. Or maybe it wasn't about us at all. Maybe that house had always been hiding something dark, and we were just unlucky enough to disturb it. We'll never know for sure. All I know is, whatever haunted that place, thankfully, it's not a part of our lives anymore. As we close the chapter on the unsettling story of a family seeking refuge only to awaken a presence they never anticipated, we're reminded that sometimes, the unknown doesn't appear for just anyone. A house can seem peaceful to one family, while another's presence stirs something dormant. It's as if an unseen force waits, needing a catalyst, a particular energy or sensitivity, to break the silence and make the past come alive. For this family, a fresh start became a descent into darkness, a terrifying dance between their world and another, separated only by a fragile boundary. Perhaps someone in their family held the energy that unlocked what others might never experience, transforming the ordinary into a haunting ordeal. When faced with such encounters, sometimes the only choice is to leave, severing ties with the unknown before it takes root in your life. Because in the end, safeguarding your peace is all that matters. If this chilling tale has left you craving more encounters with the supernatural, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Here on Tales in the Dark, the line between safety and terror is thin, and another story is always waiting.